One of the most difficult things to sort out when you are moving to Germany, or if you are even living in Germany, is the housing issue. And the most trending economical crisis now is the housing market in Germany. And in this video, I'm going to try to break down what are the good accommodations, how you can find accommodations, what are the best practices, and what are the best methods to find your own accommodation in Germany, whether you are moving here or if you are living in Germany. So if you're interested in that type of content, stick around as I go into this topic. First of all, for a little bit of context, there are three main types of accommodations in Germany. The first one being the Wohngemeinschaft, which is a shared flat where you can share and live with other people. This type of accommodation is very common in Germany. I myself is living in one currently, and with this type of accommodation, you most of the time will split the rent and the bills. Sometimes in this apartment, you'll find yourself sharing either the bathroom and the kitchen, or even both of them. In other apartments and structures, you even find yourself having maybe the same room but different beds. The second type of apartments is the private apartment, which is more private and also more expensive. This type of apartments are most of the time for the higher class people, as they get more and more expensive depending on the city where you are living in. The third type of accommodations I want to talk about here is the student dorms, which is cheap but have very long waiting lists for you to join. And if you are thinking of joining a student dorms, you will typically apply from 6 to even 1 year beforehand so that you can get a dorm. Also, a small advantage of the shared flat and the student dorms is that sometimes they are furnished, so you don't have to buy your own furniture, but sometimes they are not, like the case of the private apartment where you most of the time have to buy your own furnitures. Now let's go into the topic, where do you search the accommodation? The most common and most popular platforms are eBay Kleinanzeigen, which, if you don't know, this is like the German eBay where you can buy and resell stuff. But this platform also has a accommodation section where you can just sort out by the city where you are living in. You can also try to sort out the prices and find the best accommodation that suits your need. Another platform which is very useful in searching for these accommodations is WG Gesucht, which is also one of the best platforms. I myself have used this platform successfully. I myself have used this platform successfully in finding accommodation. Some other platforms are ImmoScout24, which is one of the best platforms, especially for the higher class people. We also have Immowelt, Immonet. These are professional real estate platforms where you can find and buy real estate. This also means that on these platforms, you'll typically find rent that will range from the lower end users to even the higher end users that will cost tens and even hundreds of thousands of euros. There are some other platforms like Housing Anywhere and Wunderflat, and I won't mention here platforms like Airbnb, which are like short-term temporary works, which are also very good solutions if you are looking for a short-term accommodation service. Some other channels that you can use to find accommodation, which I myself found very effective, is through offline and university channels, especially if you are a student. For example, on the student pin boards and even in the groups, you will typically find announcements of students who are either subletting their room or even who are leaving their rooms. You'll typically find a lot of information of other students who have accommodation, who have a shared flat, or even who are trying to sublet or even live with someone else in their own room. Sometimes you'll also find this type of accommodations through friends and network. If you are like in a group of in the university, you'll typically find from word to mouth a lot of information. Also, newspapers are kind of underrated, but they still work. There are still some information about them. The Studentenweg in most of the university also have like a housing platform where you can typically apply for the student dorms. And what I will actually advise here is, if you're coming to study in Germany, like in my case, what I did was I applied for the accommodation right when I got my admission. So the advantage with that is, once you get your admission, most of the time you'll get your admission and you'll still have to wait like 6 months to do the visa procedure, but you can already apply for the accommodation through the Studentenweg of your university if they have one. And then if you get a housing option, if you get like a housing proposal, you can then try to contact your Studentenweg to tell them you're still in the procedure, or you can even start to pay the caution, which is the topic I'm going to talk about more now. First of all, I want to talk about how you stand out when you are trying to apply for these accommodations. The first thing that you will need to do is prepare a template that you are going to use for applications. Don't forget that a lot of these applications that you are doing for accommodation, people are going to review it, and from there they are going to judge if you're a good fit for living in the house or living with them. And you need to do a good job in sending a good message and the reason why you are moving. You also need to attach your admission letter in case you're applying to the Studentenweg. And if you're an employee, you instead have to attach your work contract if available. Most of the time, some landlords are going to request for your Schufa score, which is like this credit score in Germany. And you can typically get that on a platform here called meineschufa.de. Another tip I'll give you here is if you have any documents or even any recommendation that can put you in the good lines of the landlord, I recommend attaching that in your application, because most of the landlords are also going to evaluate you based off of whether you have been living in a different apartment and how you were treated there, and etc, etc. Also, if you are granted visits, you have to treat them like a very, very professional interview. Make a very good impression, because most of the time, based off of the way you present yourself, most of the landlords are going to judge you based off of that. I know a lot of friends who went for their first visit and they were just refused their housing just because of the way they were judged. Most of them will put it on the flag of the R word, which I will say is not always the case. Now, like I said earlier, you need to start applying very, very early. For example, if you are living in Germany already and your contract is maybe ending soon, do not wait for like 3 to 4 months when your contract is ending before you start looking for a house. You can look for a house way before that, and you can start sending a bunch of applications, a bunch of messages, and you can start scouting for your next house before your contract even runs out. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that house hunting is very, very competitive in Germany. So even if you are still in your home country and you are looking for a house, you need to start applying as if you were already going to live in that house. Treat it as job hunting and do not stop applying until you get your house. One trap many people fall into is that they wait until their contract is about to expire, maybe 3 to 4 months, and they think that the housing is going to be very, very easy to get, but they fall into the trap of not getting a house in that time frame, and then they have to pay way more and they will get like a very bad contract for housing because they had no option. Which is another point that you need to keep in mind, is that you have to compare the offers. You have to read the contracts very carefully. Like if it's in German, try to translate it or even get someone to help you to read the contract. And still about the contract thing, you need to keep an eye out on scams. So never ever sign without verifying the landlord identity and visiting the place in person. If it's not an official organization like the Studentenweg, when I was back home, I paid for my own housing before I even came in Germany because I knew it was the Studentenweg handling it. If it's not an official setting like that, then I really encourage you to visit in person, and if possible, have a friend visit the place if you are not yet in the country. Never trust a landlord who says they are going to mail you the keys or that they are going to keep the keys in a safe place for you. The next thing you need to understand is the rent cost. There's Kalt meter, which is the cold rent, which typically includes the base rent and no utilities. And then there's the warm meter, which is the warm rent, which typically includes the utilities. You have to check on the job listing which one is included, because if sometimes it's just mentioned Kalt meter, then you will have to remind yourself that you will have to pay the electricity bills, the water bills, the heater bills, and all of the other utilities yourself. And if it is warm meter, then most of the time that's already covered in the rent cost. And you also have to keep in mind that most of the accommodations are going to require you to pay a caution, which is like a deposit and a first-time deposit. Usually it can be 2 months. In some cases it can be even more, and most of the time it is based off of the cold rent. Also, there are some other costs when you are renting, like almost everyone, which I can say everyone in Germany pays the Rundfunkbeitrag, which is the radio tax. Now, as a last mention, you need to have a backup plan. You can typically find cheap housing on Airbnb, which can be temporal. And if you don't find your own housing before reaching in Germany, you have to leverage your local and social network. Like for example, you can contact the university or the Studentenweg if you're stuck, and most of the time they can give you some tips. I know of some friends who were given like some spaces, some special spaces for them to live in just for the time they can find a home. And sometimes if your situation is critical, you might get put on the top of a waiting list. So that's all for the accommodation tips. If you find this video useful, don't forget to click a thumbs up and click those buttons for the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And it was Matt. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.